Yo, what is up guys? Crazy Games here, and welcome back. It's been so long since I made a video. I think it was the 7 Remake Part 4 or something. I'm sorry I didn't finish that. I'll get back to it though, because it'll be part of this series that I'm starting, which will be Legend of the Crystal reviews for Final Fantasy games. Now, I'm going to go through every game that I want to go through. I won't go through like some games like let's say after years for Final Fantasy IV. I don't care about that at all. But I will do things like in this video, I do the DLC for 15. Now you're wondering, why are you starting at 15? You're probably not wondering that. You probably don't care. I'm going to start at 15 because I want to start at 15 since I was playing 15 at the time. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make a review. And I thought, you know, I replay the franchise every other year. I try to replay every game throughout all my life. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna replay them backwards anyway, because I started at 15. I might as well start 15 and then go, you know, backwards. And eventually I'm gonna play 14. I already started 14. I'll put that in the review series too. But yeah, I just said, you know what, screw it. Let's just start with 15. I'm already here. I want to talk about 15 in a video, so I'm gonna start with 15. I'm going to go in order backwards. I'm not gonna skip around. So I'm not gonna go to like 15 to 7 to 2 to 8 or something like that. I'm gonna start from 15. Next is 13. Maybe get 14 in there after 13, or I'm Reborn at least, and do one expansion at a time and do it like that. Other than that, yeah, that's how it's gonna be. So this will be 15. This will be 15, and you will enjoy the video. There are some parts in here that are clear Tetsuya Nomura buys, and sometimes I come off a little harsh to Hajime Tabata, so if you don't like that, there will be time in the description for those parts. And there will be parts for if you don't want to watch summaries for like Kingsglaive. I put Kingsglaive in here, so if you don't care about Kingsglaive or my review for it, you know, just skip ahead. Skip ahead to the time in the thingy. So you don't have to, you know, watch Kingsglaive, or if you don't have to listen to my story summary. You know, I made some pretty good jokes in the story summary though, so I really do hope you listen to that. For 15, not Kingsglaive. Kingsglaive, I was very bored. And it's clear I was, but yeah, please enjoy the review for 15. I hope you like the series. I'm going to try to mix in other stuff with this and not just do this, but if I become a Final Fantasy channel, it's whatever. It's my favorite franchise of all time. So yeah, anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and see you around.
戻ってきちまったか。
うん、ようやくね。
待ち望んでいたんだがな。
本当。
最後まで付き合ってくれ。あ、もちろん。当たり前だ。
Like I've said before in my Final Fantasy VII video, so explaining why I love the game so much. I started playing the franchise in 99 or 2000 with Final Fantasy VII, and I never beat it because I was a dumb child with no memory card. But I haven't looked back since. I think I really got into it though in 2006 after I finally beat 7 and 10 and KH2. Those 3 games turned me into an RPG head and a Square Enix nut that hasn't stopped slobbering over most of their IPs to this day. Those 3 games were the only thing that made Square Enix hold me by the balls though. No, it was the announcement of a new shared Final Fantasy universe called the Fabula Nova Crystallis. Final Fantasy 13, Final Fantasy Agito 13, and Final Fantasy Versus 13. All 3 had these incredible trailers. What? Sasuke in Final Fantasy? Look at him go, all those weapons, oh that sword is so cool, and the whoosh and the warp, what the, oh, wow! A war? Oh wait, it's mobile Japan only. Final Fantasy with a woman pro tag? What? That gun looks so cool! What is all this that's happening? All the enemies? I was just going crazy. I knew this franchise was the one for me. Unfortunately, the shared universe didn't come out as planned or as I had hoped. Now, before I get into the review, I need to tell my story leading up to the release of Final Fantasy 15, and after that, the development history. I know that'll take a long ass time, so if you don't care about that, I'll put a timestamp here that goes straight to the review, because I know the history of Versus and 15 has been done to absolute death, and I will sound like a selfish kid by the end of my history. So yeah, skip to the time on the screen if you just want to get to the review. In 2008, we got new information on the Fabula Nova Crystallis. I was super happy that Agito 13 was moved to the PSP, and 13 looks cool, But why is it coming to Xbox? Isn't Final Fantasy a PlayStation franchise? I said that knowing that it was on Nintendo before PlayStation. I don't know why. And where the hell is Final Fantasy Versus 13? I think it was in that same year that we got a new trailer for Final Fantasy Versus 13 with the king at a round table. I guess I wouldn't know what to call it. Maybe a committee table. I'm dumb. And Noctis's party. It was all CG. We saw Prompto, Ignis, Gladio, and at the very end of that, we saw the dinner party. That trailer made me super excited. The kingdom seemed like it was going to be very Mafia influenced, and that was really fucking rad. I couldn't handle the wait, along with the fact that a year later with Advent Children Complete, we got a demo for 13, new trailers for Agito 13, and the dinner party cutscene between Noctis and Stella in full. The hype was too much for my teenage self to contain, and I needed all three, right now. Nomura did say a little bit after that in an interview that the Versus 13 scenario was complete, so when I heard that, I knew the game had to be close. After about a year of silence, something crazy happened. We saw actual footage of Noctis running around the world. It was really short, but I was super happy. The game was definitely coming along, and it looks pretty damn good. Definitely not by today's standards, but man, I thought Square was killing it. Open world Final Fantasy game, I was winning, man. And then it happened. The trailer that made me think the game was coming out a year later in 2012. We got a trailer with a bunch of story info, voice acting, and incredible looking combat. Noctis was fighting dudes in tanks, he got into a mech like Terra in FF6, and was that multiple playable characters? Come on, man, I wanted that in KH too. I was amazed, and still am to this day by that trailer. It looks really fucking good. Train wasn't stopping now, man. The devs said it was going smoothly in articles and interviews, and I was hyped. This was going to be the best game ever and beat Final Fantasy VII. Sadly, a concerning Kotaku article came out in 2012. Final Fantasy Versus 13 had been cancelled. I was genuinely scared, especially because Takashi Arakawa, the menu designer, had left Square Enix a few months before this information dropped. Thankfully, Square Enix shot the rumor down, and I knew they were right because they would never lie to their fans. These guys made Final Fantasy. They couldn't do wrong. Boy, was I an idiot because of what happens next. At E3 2013 during Sony's conference, Tetsuya Nomura in a video announced Final Fantasy Versus 13 will be rebranded as Final Fantasy 15 with another spectacular trailer. Little did I know that meant Versus was canned and repurposed into Final Fantasy 15. Not fully though. It didn't really occur to me until a few things happened, as I was just hyped the game was coming and looked good on the brand new Luminous engine. Those signs would be Nomura and Kitase leaving the game along with Kazuhige Nojima. Tabata, the PSP guy, was taking over. Interviews with Nomura going back on his word that there would be sequel games, and Square wanted it to have a universe similar to the compilation of Final Fantasy VII in 2016. When those things happened, I guess I still had hope that the game would be the same game I saw in 2011. As the release grew closer and more interviews came out from Hajime Tabata, I realized this wasn't the same game I've been following since 2006. Tabata said he wanted to make the game one-button combat, which to me, I thought Kingdom Hearts was still in the DNA. We learned that instead of being able to play in Insomnia, we'd get a movie called Kingsglaive Final Fantasy 15, and that the story would not be the same game as Versus 13. Even after hearing all that, I wanted to believe that this would still be Versus 13, and maybe those articles weren't really as big of a changes as they seemed. In November 2016, after the final delay happened, Final Fantasy 15 was released. I cried when it arrived at my door and enjoyed myself a lot. But as the days went on and I was playing the game, even after I was done, I started to dislike the game. The combat felt weird. So many characters just exist. Where are the towns? I don't get a city to really explore. The Gatling gun is okay, but where's the mech we can ride in? Story feels so rushed. Where are the bros going? Why are they leaving? It'll be DLC. Leviathan isn't as cool as it was in 2013. Where's the game I was waiting for? I defended the game as much as possible, but I knew I didn't really like it. I skipped all the DLC and never played any update minus Comrades, and that was only for 5 minutes. This wasn't the game I wanted. And after seeing Verum Rex and KH3, a potential revival of Versus 13, I hated it. 15 for me was just the stain that was left on the franchise, and I was surprised that this was allowed to happen. Has my opinion on the game changed? You'll see in the other review. Now that I got my history out of the way, it's time to talk about the development of Final Fantasy Versus 13, its cancellation, and repurposing into Final Fantasy 15. Now, we can't talk about 15 without talking about 13, and 14. Funny, I know, but it's true. In 2005, Square Enix showed off the Final Fantasy VII tech demo for PlayStation 3. Seeing overwhelmingly positive reception, they decided to move Final Fantasy 13 and Versus 13 from the PlayStation 2 to the PS3. And in 2006, they announced both of them alongside 2 other games, one of which would be part of their shared universe, the Fabula Nova Crystallis, Agito 13, Final Fantasy 14. Everything shown was a CG movie meant to give you an idea of how the games would look, and the games didn't have an engine. Not uncommon for Square Enix, as in the past each game had their own engine. This time around, they wanted an engine that could be used company-wide, similar to Capcom with the RE engine. As before, when they had different engines for different teams, they couldn't share the tools as only one group of people knew how to use the said tools. That engine would be the Crystal Tools engine. Crystal Tools was coming along just fine until they ran into some trouble. The R&D team working on the engine realized they were having problems making it work for multiple projects. It was hurting game development and the use of the engine. The engine wasn't made for Versus 13, so it had to be reworked. That was until the engine development was taking longer than planned, so the 13 team in the background was making assets on the side. Little did they know that most of them wouldn't even work with the engine. So the company decided since 13 was the next mainline Final Fantasy, they had to repurpose the engine solely to work with Final Fantasy 13, and everything else had to wait. At that time in Famitsu, Nomura stated that Final Fantasy Versus was put on hold as the Tokyo team had to be moved over to the mainline Final Fantasy team. Building an engine alongside 4 games doesn't always work out as it's planned. In 2010, on 3rd birthday, Twitter, Nomura announced that Versus was moving to a different engine, and that it would take a while as they had to switch it from Crystal Tools to the new one, but they would keep using Crystal Tools for the graphics. And this new engine would be suitable for mostly action-heavy RPGs with open-world environments. We do have images of how that game looked of this version of Versus 13, along with some concept art. As you can see here, Versus was a lot further along than people think, more further along than Type 0 was. Versus 13 further along than Type 0 sounds weird, but I'll get into that again later in this section of the video. Anyways, everything seemed like it was coming along well. The scenario was finished, we were promised destructible environments, combos that continue with the character switching system, big tactical strategic parts of the combat like positional weak spots on all enemies. Giant enemies of course would have their own weak spots, promises of more party members than the 4 bros, physics-based environments, seamless transitions with little loading, promises of rideable airships, world map, drivable cars, and some cities would get top-down perspective similar to the PS1 Final Fantasies. And in January of 2011, as I said in my personal history, we got a kick-ass trailer for the game. Sadly, a year before that trailer, disaster struck in the company. After Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 was released and was a complete mess, with reviews and fans alike panning the game.
But suffice it to say, Final Fantasy XIV is not the online RPG you should be playing. Not by a long shot.
Final Fantasy XIV is in no way, shape, or form ready for commercial release. We suppose there is potential down the line for the experience to improve with patches and tweaks, but that doesn't justify why the game is in such shambles at launch. There are too many good MMOs on the market for you to spend your time and money on this broken, incomplete mess.
Systems. Maybe in the months and years to come, Square Enix will issue enough patches to clean up the interface and iron out its technical issues, but as of right now, this is not a world worth visiting.
Along with the reception of Final Fantasy XIII in the West, they needed to reboot Final Fantasy XIV and overhaul it completely, because if they didn't, they thought it would mean the end of the franchise. Staff from multiple teams around the company were moved to Final Fantasy XIV 2.0, including some staff from Versus 13. These messages are deleted now as he was told to delete them by Square Enix, but Roberto Fernari, after release of Final Fantasy 15, spoke about one of the members that did leave the team and went to help go finish Final Fantasy 14, Mihara Nobuyoshi. There were others too, but he was the one I could find specific info for, and I want to mention his name. Staff from Type 0, Hajime Tabata's team, then moved in to help work on Versus 13. This was the start of its ill fate and becoming something completely different. Hajime Tabata claims he was called in by Wada, who asked him if cancel or start the game from scratch. Tabata said that how the game is now, it wasn't possible to keep going with the project, claiming the team didn't know what they were doing and were over ambitious, the Versus 13 team. Staff members from Type 0 were hesitant, according to Tabata, to even work on the project, because they hated Tetsuya Nomura and his team. Tabata had to convince them it was the right move. However, in an interview with French Final Fantasy fan site Finaland, Nomura says that Tabata always wanted to work on Final Fantasy Versus 13 with him, so he invited him personally because he knew he could count on him. But Tabata claims in 2012, when he became the director, he sat down with Nomura and Nojima, asking them to ensure their vision of characters and story, like Noctis, were intact. Now this doesn't make any sense, as Hajime Tabata did not take over in 2012, he was still the co-director, and it doesn't line up with anything Nomura said in the interview earlier. It's strange. It's assumed by many that after E3 2013 or TGS 2013, that Nomura was taken off the project, because in 2013, at E3, he announced Final Fantasy 15 along with Kingdom Hearts 3, and at TGS 2013, PlayStation had this event for their new PS4 projects, where they sat down and talked with creators of the next big games that are coming to the PlayStation 4, and the one they talked to was the director of the game, Tetsuya Nomura. That same year, something did change though. Towards the end, the creation of the Final Fantasy Committee. After Yosuke Matsuda took over the company, he decided to rearrange every division and how teams would work and what projects they would get, alongside creating the Final Fantasy Committee, a group that would be in charge of overseeing the franchise going forward. The members of this committee included Yoshinori Kitase, Naoki Yoshida, and Hajime Tabata, the co-director of Final Fantasy 15, but not the director. Strange. Well, in September 2014, it was confirmed. They finally said that Tetsuya Nomura had been taken off the project. This was probably earlier than they told us, because in interviews, Nomura states that they had no plans to create sequels anymore, even though they trademarked World of Versus Epic, and he stated it was called that because there were sequels that were coming out, because Versus 13 or 15 at the time would not be one singular game. So after he was kicked off, Final Fantasy Versus 13 and the Final Fantasy 13 with the original story from Versus was canned in late 2013. Many things were changed after Hajime Tabata and his team took over. Him and Yusuke Noura changed or removed characters outright, despite saying that he sat down with Nojima and Nomura to keep stuff intact. Hajime Tabata did not like Noctis' attitude or character, so he changed him entirely, giving some of his aspects to the other characters. One of the aspects being having the hobby of taking photos, which he gave a prompt. No character switching with character switching combos. Claris and Iris were changed from their designs that Roberto had, and their roles were changed completely. Umbra was changed into a messenger dog instead of being a Kingsglaive dog who transformed into a ninja. Stella didn't fit into the new story, so she was removed, replaced with Luna Nox Flore, drawn by Yusuke Naora. Korra was switched from a main party member to a guest party member. Gentiana was changed from a general to the messenger of the gods, and the Insomnia Invasion was removed outright as they didn't think it fit into their story, even though they made a movie out of it. The game was in a new direction in terms of many things. After years of complications, engine issues, team switching, and cancellations, Final Fantasy 15 was released on November 29th, 2016 to critical and commercial acclaim. This is going to be a small rant before the review starts, and I'm going to sound like a Nomura fanboy. If you don't like that, skip ahead. I'm going to talk about how I feel the project was. I'm not 100%, accurate on. I wasn't there. But with the research I've done for everything involving this, I think I should say what I think about the project as a whole and why I think that the team ruined the potential of Final Fantasy 15 when it came out in 2016. And yeah, okay, anyways, Hajime Tabata claims that he went to Nomura and Kitase, Nomura and Nojima to keep the story how it was as best as he could. But I don't think that's true, because if that is the case, why are so many things changed from the storyboard, the character personalities, as I said before, and placements in the story? Obviously, you gotta make changes to, cut it down to one game. If someone was like a major villain and there's just no room for them anymore, that's fine. But the way the game is, there's clearly that it's like a lot of nothing there, and it moves too fast. I'll talk about it in the review, but the 2016 version of the game moved way too fast. There was barely anything. It was like one of the NES Final Fantasies with things just keep zooming happening. There's a story there in place. There's a plot that they had, and it's clear what the end goal was when you beat the game and from the start. But the stuff in between, most of it just feels like nothing, and a lot of characters don't feel like they're anything. And some characters' backstories got relegated to the anime or to Kingsglaive, which is not okay. Kingsglaive, okay, I can understand. You know, if you have 3 years to make the game, you know, you can't fit it all into there, fine, make it a movie. I still think it's a stupid excuse, because I just don't think there was absolutely no way they couldn't fit that into the movie, even if they were making the engine alongside the movie, and it's clear there's probably engine troubles. I still don't understand taking elements from the story of the game and putting it into the anime. At least the anime. I'll forgive Kingsglaive, I guess, a little. Actually, I don't forgive it at all. I understand. I don't forgive it, but I just don't. Backstories for characters like Noctis, Ignis, and Prompto, that shouldn't have been in the game. And maybe they couldn't make the models for all these characters. It was just easier to send it off to some other country or other studio or wherever it was animated and do that instead. But dude, it doesn't make any sense, because the 2016 game feels so bare bones. Because he had to, I don't understand. I feel like corporate shouldn't have made them put that game out in 3 years. He claims that was the first thing I did, but it's obvious that wasn't the case, man. He claims that, oh, when I got on the game, there was no clear direction. Roberto Funari, Tetsuya Nomura's, and Hans Zimmer's interviews clearly make that seem like that's not the case. In 2013, as I said with the final interview with Tetsuya Nomura, Tabata wanted to join the game because he was always interested in it. So it's clear something happened between them working together on all these games and 15. I don't know if he was just wanting to always make his own thing, and this was his first time being able to do it, you know, and he felt like, oh, I gotta make this about me. Do whatever. That's your thing. You know, it's yours now. You know, you're not working on it anymore. It's a team you created. Everybody from Type 0 minus Nojima, Nomura, and I think I forgot who was producing. I think it was Kitase who was producing that too. You know, those 3 guys aren't there. Make it your own thing. But if you're gonna make it your own thing, and you claim to have talked to people who wrote the original story, you gotta have something there, because you took out Stella, Luna, and he says Stella couldn't fit into their story, and whatever, that might be fine. But Roberto Funari claims that this game was ready to be released in 2014, and I assume that was before Luminous happened. And you know how Square Enix was back in those days, where they need to be the best graphics, everything. And this storyboard, and all these pictures from it, and the pictures I showed earlier in the video of the game running on that new engine on PS3, show that the game actually had a direction. It was not 25% done, and they had no idea what they were doing. It was overly ambitious. You know, maybe when it switched to Luminous engine, it was 25% complete, and because they were restarting from scratch. But it's clear with these storyboards and the scenario being finished, as Nomura said, it's clear that they have the direction they want to go. And if they didn't have the direction, why did you have to remove characters willy-nilly and change their stories? Obviously there was something there. And the way the story is out is now, it's clear that unlike Type 0 and Crisis Core, him and his team had no idea what they wanted to do with the story. In the leaks in 2016, when the game was coming out and someone dropped the entire story on 4chan, they also said that the game had no direction. This was before ROMs were being ripped of the game. So obviously, the story was being written as it went along, as stated in the leaks, and as Roberto Funari claimed. There's no reason not to believe him, and it just makes no sense for me to believe that, you know, he was a better director than Nomura, or whatever people fucking say. And yes, I sound like the fanboy, whatever, I don't care. And I think it's even made more clear when Juan Zimmer said, oh, Nomura wasn't the problem. You know, he could fix things that took us weeks in a couple hours. So the man knows what he's doing. Hajime Tabata, who knew what he was doing. Juan does say that Hajime Tabata was a good director and he put people where they needed to be too. So it's not like I'm saying the guy's an awful director or anything, just that I don't like this game of his. I like his other games too. He just didn't know where he wanted to go with Nomura being creative producer, probably had to do even though he was director, still had to do what people said. And this was his first time being able to do basically whatever he wanted, even though he had to turn stuff into movies and stuff. But due to corporate, you know, meddling by Matsuda and whoever else is in charge of the company, it's still clear that it just wasn't as directed as the Nomura project would have been. And I'm not saying the Nomura project would have been fucking amazing. I mean, it probably would have to me, because the fucking Kingdom Hearts 3 was just so fucking good. Same with 7 Remake. Even if you don't like the way Nomura does his stuff, like, or his stories or whatever, there's clearly a direction there in terms of story, gameplay, and stuff. Tabata talked about the gameplay changes like 3 times, and in the episode does get down, well, the combat's not even the fucking same. So it's like, congrats on the man getting that game out in 3 years while working on an engine, at the same time having to take up someone else's project, and being told what to do by corporate. But him saying stuff like, oh, they didn't know what they were doing, oh, when I got on, the first thing I said was, it was coming out in 2016, that's what we're doing first. Man, come on. And this is even made more clear that there was definitely something going on between them, because everybody showed up to the 15 Uncovered, minus the people who worked on the game originally. Kitase wasn't there, Nomura wasn't there, Roberto wasn't there, Yoko was, I think, there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure she had to be, basically. She's a composer. Even, you know, and it's just like there's something that happened there, and they probably weren't on good terms anymore. And I mean, that's not the influence of me not liking 15, because I didn't even know this until I looked it up this year. But it's clear that there just wasn't anything going on good terms with them, and I think that definitely affected the project. Now, that's just a guess, but from what I've researched and looked up, I feel like that definitely had an influence, and emotions do have influences on things that people make. And also that, like everything I said before, Hajime Tabata just didn't have a clear direction. I mean, he's a good director. He got the game out in 3 years. He got the movie out. He got an anime series out. And I still don't think that was good because of, like I said earlier, putting out an anime with their backstory instead of putting it in the game, because the game feels like there's nothing there for most of the part when it came out in 2016. Just wasn't good. It just wasn't a good idea. It just wasn't a good idea. And I think he could have done a lot better and had a proper direction instead of just changing stuff as he went along. Kingsglaive starts off Luna Freya, voiced in this movie by Lena Hardy of Game of Thrones fame, narrating the events of the world of Final Fantasy 15, where the Empire of Niflheim has this really big hard-on for ruling the world, so they need the crystal from the peaceful kingdom of Lucius. That way they can have complete control over everything. Lucius puts up a wall to keep Nifs out, but they find a good chance to attack when Regis takes his son Noctis to Tenebrae to receive healing. Niflheim attacks the event, taking the life of Luna and Ravis's mother, with an attempt on Regis's life. Fast forward 12 years later, we meet the main character of this story, Nyx, who's cocky in his abilities, granted him by being a member of the Kingsglaive, an elite group of knights granted the power of the crystal by King Regis. Alongside his friends Chrono Libertas, they're defending the kingdom by fighting in a desert city off the coast of Lucius, confronting Diamond Weapon from Final Fantasy VII, who launches a big attack, which causes the general to give everyone the order to retreat. Libertas gets handicapped in the attack and can't move from under a giant boulder. Instead of leaving his friend to die, he warps over to him and takes him from under the rock, saving his friend, leading to him being punished, and his punishment is to watch over Lady Luna Freya. Before we get to Nyx and Luna, we meet Ardyn and Izunia, and the great King Regis, voiced by Sean Bean. Ardyn is here to make negotiations to stop this senseless war, as he calls it. The terms are to give up everything in the kingdom, minus Insomnia, and have Prince Noctis wed to Luna Freya. The king does not like this condition, going by the look on his face. Later they have a meeting at the king's table, I still don't know what to call it, I'm sorry, to discuss what they should do about Niflheim. Oh, before I go on, I didn't know that this dude here was Gladiolus' father, and one of the many things I was very upset about them changing from 13 to 15, he just doesn't look like he vibes with the world. I mean, he does now, but so does Regis, and it's just one of the many things that I think makes Noctis and Party stand out, since they're created by Tetsuya Nomura in terms of art style. The king and his men give in to the terms, and by the looks of everybody around the city, everyone is mad and upset, thinking that now that the war is over, they have no reason to wield the king's magic. This is it for the Kingsglaive, and they feel like they'll be thrown out. The hero Nyx and Libertas send Crow off to go pick up Lady Lunafreya. Meanwhile, Luna prepares to leave for Insomnia, but is interrupted by Ravis as he doesn't want her to tell the king, who he believes killed their mother, about a plot that Niflheim is planning, saying that it's made up, it's fake, it's some random dream you had. Luna doesn't care and leaves anyway. She goes to the capital to learn that Regis has sent Noctis away. Regis asks her to go to him, but she says, nah, he good, I'm here to revive my boy Nick. Really, it's so she can protect him from the Empire, which is just an excuse so that the movie can be a thing instead of us playing the Insomnia invasion and having the party scene with Noctis and Stella. Later, the general gets a call that Crow is dead. Nyx and Libertas are distraught that they lost their friend. Libertas gives us her backstory that she was an orphan that was taken in by Libertas, and the look in her eyes made her look determined. I don't know what the point that's supposed to do. It doesn't make me feel anything for her at all. In his fit of anger, he blames the crown and leaves the Kingsglaive for good. Fast forward to that night where we get the dinner scene. The king of Niflheim talks to Regis about them meeting tomorrow, and Luna speaks to Nyx as the movie tries to recreate the dinner scene from verses 13 in a way that feels like the team was trying to fulfill a quota because people were watching trailers for 7 years.
Then surely there's no safer place for me to be. May I ask your name?
Next Auric.
It doesn't feel natural. They hammer this homage home with Somnus playing in the background. He hands Luna the gift that Crow had for her, a hair. Luna says she'll keep it with her always. Lib meets up with a group of anti-Regis dudes who believe that the Empire will take their homes away and destroy them, even though they've been destroyed by the Empire already. The next day, Luna goes missing, and thanks to the hairpin that was given to her by Nyx, he has a way to track her. Nyx runs to the king, telling him that Luna has been kidnapped and that a war fleet is on its way. Nyx and the king ready a mission for the Glaives, where they have 2 objectives: save Luna and stop the Nifs from flying into Insomnia. Something feels fishy though, as the fleet they attack doesn't feel like a war fleet, more of a distraction. Luna is saved, but it turns out it was all a trap. Back in the city, the Citadel scene from verses 13 trailers are recreated with guns and floating weapons pointed at throats. It was all a trick so that the Empire could gain the crystal. Final War of Niflheim begins. The crystal is stolen, the walls fall, and the city is turned into a war zone. Back on the airship, Luna and Nyx are attacked by Ultros and the Kingsglaive. What's happening? The ships start to explode and falling on top of each other. And another scene recreated from the trailer. Luna and Nyx escape Ultros and the Glaive and make their way back to the Crown City. The Regis and his men have a fight with General Galuka, the same man who killed Luna and Ravis' mother. Claris, Gladio's father, and the others lose their lives protecting the king against Galuka. Ravis shows up and admits the reason he joined the Nifs was so that he could take the power of the Ring of Lucii from King Regis. He puts it on and then it destroys his arm. He's there left lying on the ground. Why were you even in the movie, dude? You didn't have to be here. Nyx and Luna arrive, joining King Regis in his escape from the... He asks Nyx to keep Luna safe so that she can go see Noctis and they can save the world together. Nyx doesn't like this, as that the king plans to sacrifice the entire kingdom just to save his son. He realizes that the world is more important and gets over it. General Galuka and Regis have one final battle, where Galuka is the winner, taking Regis' life. Galuka does some weird victory scream. I don't know what the fuck that was for. They don't bring it up later. They don't. I don't understand. I guess it has to do with something that happens later in the movie, but it just feels whatever. Meanwhile, Lib finds out that all the refugees have turned their lives over to the Empire. The same refugees that were kicked out of their homes by the Empire. Nyx and Luna are attacked by everything under the sun that the Empire has. Mechs, the traitors' glaives, daemons, the whole shebang. After they settle down, Luna explains that the one who had the ring in his hand was her brother, explaining how he changed into a fool who only wants power. This really only exists to tell the viewer and not Nyx, because it doesn't make any sense for Nyx to learn this. Nyx and Luna escape the clutches of the daemons and are told to meet Lucia's guards at Section D, so they can escape the city. At the same time, Lib gets a call on a walkie-talkie, the Kingsglaive and the anti-Regis group to meet up at Section D so they can grab the ring and realize their revolution. Lib realizes guesses who's on the other side of the walkie-talkie, and it makes his way to save Nyx. Luce, a dude from earlier in the movie, turns out to be a traitorous Kingsglaive too. He tells Nyx he should have joined the Empire, as the Kingsglaive was going to be thrown out by King Regis. After shooting him, he moves to corner Luna and take the ring from her. Luna tells him about it, he puts it on, and he burns himself to death. Rip Bozo, let's fucking go. Lib comes in to save Nyx as he knows that General Galuka's identity is really the captain of the Glaive. He transforms and attacks Lib and Luna. In order to protect his friends, Nyx puts on the ring, sending him to the realm where he talks it out with the kings of Lucius. He has to choose between protecting Luna or Lib, but instead he chooses he would sacrifice his own life and will give it to them when the sun rises. They hand him their power and he once again is able to fight. Nyx asks Lib to take Luna and escape from the city, but that won't be easy as Diamond Weapon is attacking Insomnia, making it hard for them to leave. Galuka taunts Nyx and tells him there's no point in fighting for this city. Nyx tells him that he isn't fighting for Insomnia anymore, and they have an all-out giant fight. Galuka tries to guilt trip Nyx into joining the Empire by talking about his sister, but Nyx says, "I'm good, man," and the fight continues. Lib makes it out to the edge of the city, seeing the destruction behind him, hopes for Nyx to come out of it safely, and drives away with Luna, fulfilling the promise to his friend. The final clash between Nyx and Galuka begins with both of them once again riding on top of these giants and spouting their ideals at each other. Nyx finally kills Galuka, ending the Glaive's betrayal of Insomnia. As they both die, Nyx believes in Noctis, hoping that he will be the one to save their homes. The movie ends with Lib and Luna parting ways, saying that they have promises to keep to Nyx. Luna finally sets out on her journey to meet with Noctis and Altissa. I really don't like this movie. In fact, I think it's really bad. Besides the nice visuals and a cool fight at the end, I feel like this is a terrible excuse to cut content from the game. The voice acting is all over the place because some of these people are actual voice actors and some are Hollywood actors, and Hollywood ones just don't do good voice acting. You can tell who's who. The characters feel shallow as all hell. You barely get enough time with them before everything goes to shit, especially the villains. Oh my god, the villains are awful. Let's start with them before I get to anything else. The villains, the Glaive, want to betray the kingdom because the Empire promised they get their homes back. The same Empire that destroyed their homes. You can't expect me to think this is good. These are not good antagonists when they have this logic. They're dumb and the writing comes off as dumb. I feel they could have come up with something else. They didn't have to have this plot of betrayal from the king's elite guards. Their reason to join the elite guards of the king was because they were picked out of their homes so they could fight back against the Empire that destroyed their homes. So when the king doesn't say it himself, they believe the king was going to kick them out because he gave up the kingdom. They betray him to the people that destroyed their homes. That doesn't make any sense. It makes zero sense to me, and I can't be convinced it's good. It's terrible writing. On to Nyx. He's just, I don't know. I just don't like him. His type of character can work, but I just don't get anything out of him. The big hero guy who's cocky in his abilities and wants to make sure he can save people to make up for helping what happened to his little sister. Sometimes these type of characters can be endearing, like Zack from Final Fantasy VII, but he's not. He's not endearing or interesting. He feels like a one-note character. And you can have your one-note characters you can root for. Hell, this game has one. But I found no enjoyment in him. Feels forced in. He doesn't come off as a natural element to the world of Final Fantasy 15. And that could be because he's acted by Aaron Paul, and these characters don't look like they belong in Final Fantasy 15 at all. That can be said for the whole movie too. Crow dies too fast for us to feel anything for her when she's gone. Lib tries to make you feel for him, but again, just like Nyx and the rest of the Glaive, it's shallow. How can you have them take front and center but they don't feel like good characters? It's beyond me. Maybe that's me feeling like I was robbed of something that was supposed to be in the game. Another thing that I feel was robbed from us was when they redesigned the entire kingdom's wardrobe and setting. It was taken from being mafia inspired into being just the random generic kingdom in every fantasy setting, because they wanted to change Regis's appearance because they used Sean Bain as his face actor in the movie. You didn't need to do that. You could have just kept it. You didn't have to hire these professional actors to take over the faces of our characters we saw for years, like Luna and Regis. You could have kept it the same as we've been seeing for years and kept the mafia motif. The movie was ripped from the game because they felt the story of Final Fantasy 15 was too big to fit into one game. Because the Niflheim invasion was so huge to the story, they wanted to keep it in. But they didn't want to make it playable. They made it a movie with characters who really don't matter to the game, minus the Emperor, Ardyn, Ravis, Regis, and Luna, who all get put on the back burner so they can turn something that was promised to us for years into a movie, with Aaron Paul as the hero guy. What this should have been was part of the game. An intro section similar to Roxas in Kingdom Hearts 2, pre-time skip arc in Tales of Graces F. Hell, I would have taken them selling it to me as a prologue like 0.2 or Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes. But no, instead we get a shallow movie with shallow reproductions of scenes we saw in trailers leading up to 2014, the main cast pushed to the side to give way to a group of people who in the end serve no purpose to the game other than getting Luna out of the city. I know they were trying to get the game out fast because they've been working on it since 2006. They changed the game from a multi-part epic to a single one, and I'm glad Tabata admitted that this isn't Versus 13. But they should have kept this in the game, because I don't get attached to Insomnia. When Noctis loses Insomnia and you go back at the end of the game, they want you to feel like you're reclaiming your home. I can't feel like I'm reclaiming something I wasn't there for, and I'm not putting myself in the shoes of Nyx, who doesn't exist in the game. Almost forgot to bring up the music. It's very forgettable, and there's not a single track in the movie that I can remember, which is really weird considering the game has one of the most memorable soundtracks in the franchise. Why did that quality not carry over into the movie? I don't know. When you're making a game, you need to prioritize the game first. Make sure you get the episodes like the Invasion of Insomnia into the game instead of making it into a movie. A huge disappointment. I hope something like this never happens again. Now it's finally time to talk about this part that you guys have all been waiting for. Me talking about the game. Maybe you're here for my sexy voice? Probably not. You're here for the game. Let's start with the story. For this section, summarization, I'll put a timestamp to the review on the thingy if you don't care about that either. I'm going to include mostly just the game and the DLC episodes minus Ardyn. I should talk about Brotherhood because I talked about Kingsglaive, but I probably won't just because I don't feel like watching that too. I won't include episode Ardyn because it doesn't fit into 15's regular story, so it just doesn't work. Maybe a separate review if its own thing, but as a part of 15 it just doesn't work. Okay, on to Final Fantasy 15's story. Let's go. The story begins with a flash forward of Noctis and his friends, Gladio, Ignis, and Prompto, fighting a fiery figure, which according to director Hajime Tabata is a throwback to the start of FF2. It didn't come off like that to me, but that's pretty cool that the game has FF references like the old games did. So it's cool to see that they reference too. We don't get to see the battle through as we are sent back to the present where Noctis is sent off to be led to Lady Lunafreya by his father and Claris. After this scene, we don't really get any stuff for Noctis' family relationships in the game. You'll have to watch Brotherhood for that. Our heroes are then out of gas, stuck on the road, bickering like brothers do, pushing their crowned car, the Regalia, to the closest gas station, Hammerhead, where they meet Regis' friend Sid and his granddaughter Sydney. Sid insults Noctis and tells the boys it's gonna take some time to fix their car back up, so it's time for you to do some questing. Crown City Cash, for some reason, isn't Gil, even though this whole area is owned by the Kingdom of Lucius, but okay. So the boys are tasked by Sid to kill some monsters and make some money. They get a distress call from a man, part of a group called the Hunters, named Dave. They find the man and save him from some saber tusk and then head on back to Hammerhead. Sydney tasks the boys with delivering a package to a friend at the motel now that the car is fixed, before heading on to Golden Quay, the resort where their carriage to Altissa awaits. Pack up everything they need and say goodbye, much to the sadness of Prompto, who has fallen for the lovely Sydney. Before they get to the quay, the boys stop at the motel, and Noctis receives a message from Luna. In their flashback to them as kids where they learn Luna and Noctis have been doing this for years to keep in touch with each other, and Noctis sends a message back. After arriving to the quay, they're stopped by a mysterious man. He warns the party that the ships that they're waiting for can't sail as the docks are closed. He introduces himself to them as a man of no consequences, and he leaves. They meet a man named Dino, who confirms the situation, and somehow knows Noctis is a hunter. He says he'll keep quiet if Noctis and Co grab a gemstone for him. In case you haven't noticed, that's gonna be a lot of the start of the game. Well, not a lot, but it's a decent amount. Enough for it to bother. It makes the story feel lesser compared to other Final Fantasies. Does the game need to be bombastic throughout its entire run? No, my faves don't even do that. But a good chunk of the game's main story in part 1 is going and doing stuff for people you met. What happened to stuff like Final Fantasy VIII's CG intro, or Final Fantasy VII's bombing mission, or in Final Fantasy VI when you play as Terra and go terrorize the town? I think Final Fantasy games are better when they start off with crazy things like that. Every game before this has done it, and it just feels weird that Noctis just helps anybody. It's at the detriment of the story. It doesn't flow well, and it's really strange considering the game moves at fucking light speed. We'll get more into that soon, but before that, the boys get the gemstone and make their way back to Dino. He promises them a ferry and no leaking of the info that he is a monster hunter now. They prepare themselves to leave in the morning. That night, Insomnia is attacked. In 1.0, they didn't have a cutscene here, so on the day 1 patch, they added it, and it's literally just the Kingsglaive invasion scene slapped on and the city being destroyed. Cut from the game, turned into a movie because thought it wouldn't fit in the story they were telling, only for them to put it in there again, but slapped on from a movie. Cool! Gosh. Noctis wakes up to Ignis coming into his room with the news that their home is gone and his father is dead. Noctis is angry and needs to see it for himself, so they head back towards the city through a shortcut since the entrance is blocked by the Niflheim soldiers. They fight their way through the shortcut and make it to the edge outside with no way into the city. They hear from their phones that the news pronounces him, Luna, and Regis as dead. Noctis just can't believe it, and to find out the whole truth, he must meet up with Kor, the Marshal of the Crownsguard. Meanwhile, Luna makes it out of the city and she is traveling. She receives Noctis' message and is happy that he is safe. She also shows Gentiana that she has the ring. Moving back to the party, we go to Hammerhead, where Sid tells the party that the Niflheims were always after the ring, and Regis wasn't being played. He tried his hardest to fight back against them, but it resulted in his death. Sid tells the boys that Kor is at a tomb. They get to the tomb and meet Kor. He tells Noctis that he must take on the role as the protector of Lucius now that his father is gone. They have an argument and Noctis almost breaks down, but he realizes he has no choice and takes on his duty, absorbing the royal arm, the power of his predecessors. His next task is to visit another tomb of the kings, Patriarch Trench. They go through the crypt with some good jokes and dialogue here and there, and they
無茶すんなよ。
暮らしてたの？戦火から逃れて。あ、なんだろう。コードこっちに伸びてる。何と繋がっているんだろうな。発電機？そうみたいだな。動くかな？エンジンかかんない？よし。終わった。
We gain access to another of the king's power. Noctis is asked to meet Monica at the Imperial base to take it down so they can get access to Duscae. They take down the base, but not before Long Q shows up in his mech to take down our heroes. He, like a lot of the Empire, shows up only once, spouts words, and then they are defeated, never to be seen again. They have nothing really to them minus 2 characters, and one of them really wasn't much of a character until the updates and DLC. It's super upsetting because Final Fantasy games have had villains that don't stick around that long but are really entertaining and memorable in like multiple ways. So it's like, why did the Empire just not have anything at all? You're the major villain faction of the game and you're gonna faces and names of people we beat up and we don't see ever again. They defeat Long Q and open the path to Duscae. Cord bids them farewell until the Gladio DLC and we go off to find more tombs. We move to a scene where we meet the major players of the Empire, Legolas Elderkept, Verstale Besethia, and Ravis Nox Fleur. They talk about finding the ring, Luna, and Noctis instead of killing them. Verstale suggests that they use them to gain the power of the gods. Ravis thinks, nah, let's just find him and, kill him, and the scene ends. The game makes their way to the next stop on their journey, which is Lestalum, the city that Insomnia refugees have run to, so they can meet Gladio's sister, Iris. On their way to the hotel, there's a nutty earthquake that leads to Noctis getting headaches as a flash of visions of a giant brown eye. We meet Iris, Telcott, and Jared, 2 huge fans of Prince Noctis, giving their oath that they would protect Iris no matter the cost. After they leave, Iris tells the boys about what happened in the capital, and she doesn't really say anything other than Luna is good. After a night's rest and a day with Iris, Noctis and the gang hears of a legend that a sword in a tomb is behind a waterfall nearby. After grabbing the sword, they make their way back to Lestalum. Everyone is starting to notice Noctis' headaches are getting worse. This time, he sees a full vision of the mountainous god and the meteor disc. To get a closer look, they make their way towards the scope, where they meet the mysterious man from before. He tells them that he'll take them to see the god, and finally gives them his name, Ardyn. They make their way to the disc. Meanwhile, Luna is shown healing people of the Star Scourge. We then go back to the boys getting to their destination at the Archean's door. Ardyn allows them in by calling to the Empire guarding it. Strange. Anyways, they grab the royal arm, but another earthquake happened. So strong it breaks the ground that they're standing on, sending Noctis and Gladio down into the depths of a fiery volcano cavern, meeting the god Titan. He tries to communicate with Noctis, but he can't understand him. Gladio and Noctis make their way through the caves, getting into an argument. Gladio tells Noctis that he is his shield and that he will always be there for them, so stop whining about everything. They can't get too comfortable as the Empire has joined the fray. A fight between the Empire, the party, and Titan begin. After they win, he shows Noctis a vision of Luna being there, asking for Titan to give her power to him, so that he can use their power to banish the darkness. There's no way for the boys to escape. That's until Ardyn shows up and tells them he's there to pick him up, also giving away that his last name is Inzunia. He is Ardyn Inzunia, the Imperial Chancellor. They are hesitant to join, but as they have no other option, they take his aid. Several days pass and the gang is stuck at the Chocobo stop because the regalia was taken, waiting for Sydney to report to them about her finding it. In the meantime, the boys run into Umbra and Gentiana. Gentiana tells Noctis that Luna is busy at the island of Angelgard, speaking to Ramuh so that Noctis can receive his blessing. She says that after he receives his blessing, he should make his way to Altista, as that is where Luna is waiting for him, as she is going to speak to Leviathan. The boys make haste around Duske as they find all 3 pieces of Ramuh's blessing. During this time, we receive flashbacks of Noctis speaking to Gentiana and Luna as a child, saying how much he cares for her. After they gain all the pieces of Ramuh, Sydney calls them to tell them that she found the regalia at an Imperial base. Noctis tells him that they gotta go to the base and grab old girl so they can head to Cape Kayam, where his father's boat will be located. They make their way to the base and scout it out. He just makes a plan that the best way to attack is to go at night. The boys go in and trash the place and grab the car, but they can't leave, not before they have a run-in with Ravis. Ravis tries to kill Noctis, tells Gladio, man, you're really not shit. You're a terrible shield. Before Ravis can kill Noctis, Ardyn steps in to save the day. Next time we meet, we'll be in Altissa, and, you know, we can settle it there, man. After that, they both leave. The gang makes their way back to Lestalem to pick up Iris, so they can all go to Cape Kayam. When they get back to town, they agree to have bad news. Jared is dead. Now, I know I keep putting review stuff during the summarization, but this is just not good. You want the player to feel what Noctis supposedly is supposed to feel, but it comes off as shallow. Noctis talked to this guy once, twice if you count Telcott telling him, oh, there's a key at a waterfall and it might have a tomb that you're looking for. That's it. He's so angry about Jared dying that he goes to an Imperial base to get revenge. You already had it set up for him to get revenge for his father to go destroy Imperial bases or anything Imperial. This doesn't feel well done, and the revenge for it feels shallow. It's payoff without build-up, and that's super upsetting. They could have given us some actual time with Telcott and Jared like they do with Iris. Even though it's small, but you can do small scenes like that and still make me care about the character. Plus, she gets more later. If we had more time with Jared, this would have actually been a good payoff scene. Character deaths are good when they have proper build-up, but it's not. This isn't the only other time something like this happens either. I'll save those for the review. Noctis and the bros, along with Iris, go to an Imperial base to get revenge, taking a captain hostage to get info out of him. Ignis loses him, of course, so they go ham in the base, destroying it all, causing the Imperial General, Aranea Highwind, the baddest bitch in the game. Her design is so fucking good, man. Golly! Anyways, they fight, you beat her, and then she says, oh, I gotta go. And then she leaves, and then the boys leave. After the revenge, it's time to make our way to the Cape. Before that, Noctis has a terrible dream that was added in 1.2 that is literally just the Omen trailer, and it means absolutely nothing because nothing like this is done in-game or talked about, so why the hell was it added? They wake up, drive, and stop by another cave on their way as they need to pick up another royal arm. When they get to the Cape, Sydney and Sid tell them that the boat isn't working. It's missing a piece that can only be made through mineral called mithril. Telcott, through Jared's notebook, learns that there is a ruins called the Vesper Pool that contains mithril. The boys get packed up and ready to go, but someone won't be coming with. That's right, Gladio has to leave. He says he has to go do something and they gotta go do it without him. They're like, okay, goodbye, and they go their separate ways. Gladio is leaving so he can go do the trial of Gilgamesh alongside Kor. He wants to do the trial to get stronger so he can take out Ravis again and so he can protect Noct. Gladio learns that the trial is for those who are to become the true shields of the king. That furthers his resolve. We learn that the only one who ever came back alive from the trial was Kor, and as they make their way through, we learn why. Kor was reckless and thought he could do everything alone. He got his ass handed to him by Gilgamesh and Rant. Because he couldn't beat him, he could not become a shield to the king. Before Gladio faces off with Gilgamesh, he tells him that to become a shield you must put your life on the line for the king and no one else, not even yourself. He heads onto the bridge, waiting for Gilgamesh. They have a sick boss fight and Gladio claims victory. After a lecture from Gilgamesh about finding inner peace with who you are, that allows you to become a true shield. During that time, Luna sends a message to Noctis showing that she is waiting for him in Altissa. During both of these, we see the boys make their way to the Vesper Pool. They arrive and are greeted by none other than Ardyn, who for some reason knows why they are here and decides to help them out. As this is Imperial owned, he allows them passage if they go with Aranea. They make their way through the dungeon, getting to know Aranea along the way, making it to the end, finding their mithril, but of course they have to do a boss fight. They finish off Kuzetal and make their escape. Aranea offers them a ride back to Lessalem, and they find Sydney's friend who can make it into usable material. But before they can leave, something goes amiss in the factory. Noctis and Co offer to help Sydney's friend clear the factory while she makes the material in the meantime. Noctis meets a mystery hunter. They defeat the demons terrorizing the factory and leave. Turns out it was Gladio. Finally back and the gang's all here. Woo! Now that they have the mithril, they can finally make their way to Altissa, grab a Leviathan, and see Luna. They say their goodbyes and set sail with Sid as the driver. Sid tells the boys that he and Regis had a falling out, but they buried it. Too bad he never saw him before he died. We learn Sydney's past, kinda. Her parents died, that's really it. Sid tells them him and Regis' friend Wes comes place, a diner called Mago. As they make their way through the beautiful city of Altissa, they get to Mago. Noctis asks him a few questions about the Empire being here, learns that the Empire has people all over the city and that their plan is to kill Leviathan. Camilla Crostra says that she has Luna but won't give her up to the Empire. Noctis will give her a good deal instead. The next morning, Noctis makes his way to her office. After careful negotiations, she agrees to allow Luna to go with Noctis instead of the Empire, as long as they can fight with the Empire to protect Leviathan while also keeping all the civilians safe. Gladio, Ignis, and Prompto agree to evacuate the citizens while Noctis gets his power from the goddess and Luna. Later, Luna speaks to Camilla saying that she'll be under watch from the Empire, and after the rite, her people won't protect her anymore. Luna makes her way out to the stands to give her speech about Lucius's downfall. Don't let the ruin make you give in to despair. That her and the gods will make sure that their world will be saved. After the Empire makes their way in, Luna brings forth Leviathan. Too bad she and Luna are surrounded by the Empire, so it's up to Noctis to save the day. And one of the most make me go hard to soft sequences in a video game ever, Noctis makes his way through the halls fighting off Nifs and Leviathan clones. Leviathan gets mad at Luna because she thinks humans are lowly creatures and doesn't want to give her power to the chosen king. Luna fights back, telling her Noctis can prove himself, you egotistical serpent bitch, and she agrees, but it says if he fails, she's going to eat everyone in the country. Noctis makes his way to her, riding on ships with the lads, grabbing on Leviathan, and being thrown off after yelling at her. He gets folded, of course, like a bundle of clothes. Luna makes her way towards him, but is killed by Ardyn. Before she dies, she tells her to give Noctis the ring and to come get the crystal. She gives us a hint at Ardyn's role in the story, saying that he will know peace once the prophecy is fulfilled. What does that mean? Well, anyways, she gives all of her and the past king's power to Noctis, and he turns into supersonic Noctis, who can fly around and shoot weapons like a Star Fox all range mode. After breaking Leviathan's limbs and calming her, Noctis falls to the altar and loses consciousness. Luna gives him the last bit of her strength she has left and the ring. They end up in Purgatory, where she and Noctis have one last talk, telling him it'll be okay, she'll always be there for him, and then she dies. While that is going on, Ignis gets separated from Gladio and Prompto. He ends up in the city alone, fighting his way through and helping Camilla evacuate citizens in exchange for her helping him get a boat to save Noctis. He makes his way there but is stopped by the general, who they attacked at the base while getting revenge for Jared. Ravis told him not to attack Noctis and Co, but man just cannot help himself. He spouts stuff about killing Jared and mocks Noctis, but Ignis gets the upper hand and beats him. The general won't just give up though, as he makes his way to finish off Ignis. Thankfully, Ravis comes in to finish him off. Ravis wants to get to Luna and will work with Ignis since both their objectives are in the same place. They Metal Gear it up, fight some Imperials, and eventually make their way to the altar. Ravis, seeing that his sister has died, blames Noctis for not just that, but for every misfortune that has befallen on his family. So he must now kill him in order to take his revenge. Ignis can't allow this, so he fights Ravis. That is not the fault of Noctis, but the fault of the Empire. Ignis not wanting Ravis to take revenge is kinda hypocritical, but in this situation, it makes sense since it really is not Noctis' fault. They finish their fight and Ravis realizes that it really is the Empire. They make up and take Luna and Noctis, but are stopped by Ardyn disguised as Gladio. Both of our heroes are beaten down, and Ardyn threatens to take Noctis' life in front of Ignis. Ignis, wanting to protect his friend he's known for his entire life, puts on the ring. In exchange for his temporary power, he gives up his eyesight, never being able to see Noctis again. He temporarily defeats Ardyn, but can't finish the job. He falls unconscious, later being found by Gladio and Prompto. A few days later, Noctis wakes up out of bed and is destroyed, knowing that Luna died for him and Ignis lost his vision. They make their way out of Altissa, continuing their quest to the Empire to get back their crystal and take revenge after losing so much. After several weeks of travel, they find out there's a royal arm in the Kartanak region of Niflheim. Gladio and Noctis argue on the train over Noctis feeling sorry and down for himself instead of accepting what has happened to Ignis and Luna and carrying on his mission. They get to their stop, have to head down to the swamps here. Ignis tags along because Noctis wants him to be there and doesn't see him as a burden. They make their way to the tomb and run into a Marlborough. I think it's a Marlborough. Is it Marlborough? Marlborough? Marlborough, bro? Man, whatever. Anyways, Ignis may be blind, but he can still fight. He comes up with a plan, and they take the monster down in a blaze. After they get the arm, Ignis finally speaks up. He's tired of them arguing because of him. He knows damn well that he's blind, but he wants to continue to fight, asking Noctis if it's alright, as the king always pushes forward and never looks back, accepting whatever consequences they face. After that, they allow him to stay in the group. Hopping back on the train and continuing their way to the Empire, Ignis and Gladio learn that the nights are getting longer. The darkness is taking over and it's time to get the crystal back so they can wipe it out and bring the light back. Ardyn, disguising himself as Prompto, shows up. Noctis is filled with rage and chases after him, not knowing that it's actually Prompto he's attacking. Before he can end his life, the Empire attacks the train. They evacuate all the civilians to the front and take on the Empire. After that's done, Noctis warps back onto the train. Ardyn appears taunting Noctis. Noctis takes a swing, but it wasn't Ardyn. It was once again Prompto. This time, Noctis knocks Prompto off the train, sending him down to his demise. Horrified by his actions, he begs Ignis to stop the train. Sadly, they can't. They have to keep going as demons have started to invade the train. Noctis fights them all on top of the train with the help of Leviathan. After that, they make a stop in Tenebrae, as that is the best place to let all the civilians stay instead of taking them to the Empire's capital, as the danger is getting worse the closer they get to the city. In Tenebrae, Noctis and Co ask Ardyn to find Prompto. She agrees, and instead of taking them to the original conductor, she meets up with two Empire generals to escort them, Biggs and Wedge. Two military generals would be better suited for this job, so they agree. Before they leave, Noctis speaks with Luna's maid. She tells Noctis that Ravus too would be happy to hear that Noctis has gotten the Ring of Lucius from Luna. Ravus would. Well, as it turns out, Ravus wanted Luna to deliver the ring to Noctis this entire time, so that Luna could admit her feelings to him. This feels oddly placed, as before episode Ignis, Ravus was clearly trying to kill Noctis and was still angry at him about his father. So I don't know how to feel. The scene comes off as good, but it just makes no sense. It's like there was no proper direction or idea where to place this. I feel like they should have just kept it out of the game instead of trying to force it in, because it just feels weird. Anyways, she tells him that Ravus is in the capital and waiting for Noctis so he can return his dad's sword to him. Before he leaves, Ardyn tells him that for some reason the crystal isn't allowed to be seen by anyone, not even the Emperor himself. I wonder why. Isn't it supposed to keep demons away? Shouldn't it be seen by everybody? Very, very strange. A little girl shows up and tells Noctis that Luna was really excited to marry him. She really did love him. We get another weirdly placed scene as there is no one to tell Noctis that the scene happened. Luna talks to Gentiana about how much she loves Noctis and then hopes that he loves her just as much. And she is very excited for him to see her wedding dress. After that, the boys get on the train and make their way to their destination, the Empire capital. Meanwhile, we see a flashback of child Prompto telling the player that he as a child had no friends, and once he met Noctis and Co, he stuck with them, hoping that they would never find out who he really is, because if they did, he fears that they would abandon him. He awakens in an Imperial lab. The door speaks to him after scanning the barcode on his arm. Prompto is very confused. Ardyn, of course, shows up to explain. This lab is the first production facility for Magitech soldiers, Prompto's home sweet home, taunting him about being abandoned by Noctis. He has to go, of course, but before he leaves, he tells him seeing Verstale should jog his memory of the place. The further in he goes, the more he slowly starts to realize what everything means. He meets up with Verstale and Ardyn. Ardyn, as a thanks for giving them the tools to invade Insomnia, reveals to Verstale that he has brought his child back. It turns out that Prompto is the child clone of Verstale. Now that father and son are back together, Prompto can give his body back so he can turn into a god. After being shot by Prompto, he is finally able to turn, having his soul transferred into the body of a new Magitech weapon. The facility turns on Prompto. Thankfully, Ardyn shows up like she promised and gets him out of there. They make their way towards the cave away from the lab. At the camp, Prompto's going through it, trying to scratch and burn off his barcode. Ardyn heals his wounds and talks with him, telling him that the gang is worried sick about him, saying he should go back to him. Sadly, he feels he doesn't deserve to be with them because he isn't an Aleutian, and he's a lab rat. She goes off on him and telling him that you're fucking stupid, man. You've been together for years, get your shit together. You worry too much about what other people want and not what you want. What do you want to do? God. The next morning, she's gone. Prompto walks around thinking about what she said. Too bad he's busy imagining himself as an MT warrior getting attacked by Noctis. Luna sending Prina sent Prompto into a flashback, where he hears her tell him to be there for Noctis. He again wonders if they really want him to, but he finally comes to the conclusion that he wants to be with them. He's loved them his entire life, and he's gonna face his fears and meet his friends in the capital. Prompto and Ardyn need to take care of his dad first though, before he's able to destroy the world with his new Magitech weapon. They make their way through the facility, fight a monkey, and finally his father, after the Magitech monster awakens. They defeat him and celebrate, and see each other off. Ardyn watches as he hurries off. Back on the train, the boys are stopped by frozen train tracks and more daemons. After their victory, Ardyn is on the train again. This time he's stopped by Gentiana, who turns out to be Shiva. She shows Noctis a vision of Luna telling Ravus that she's giving her life away for Noctis because of how much she loves him. She told Luna she would make sure Noctis knew, and she also tells him about Ifrit hating humanity after they felt they didn't need the gods anymore. The darkness of man took control of the hatred that was in him, causing him to join Ardyn. Noctis weeps for Luna and moves forward with his new resolve. Ardyn shows up again to taunt Noctis, and he tells Noctis that Prompto is in the capital of Niflheim and that he's there with the crystal. As they make their way there, they're stopped again, but this time the train can't move forward because of the overwhelming amount of them. The boys make their way to the car and drive their way through the capital, crashing right outside of their destination. Noctis and Co say goodbye to the regalia and make their way into the fortress. It doesn't go as planned though, as they get separated and Noctis loses his powers. The only thing he has to defend himself is the ring. He finally puts it on, and with it, he makes his way to Prompto and the crystal. Meanwhile, Gladio and Ignis are given their weapons back by Ardyn. They don't trust them, but they need all the help they can get right now. Making their way through the fortress, they learn that the city is being attacked by daemons, which shouldn't be possible since they have the crystal. But for some reason, a blight's going around that's turning people into daemons. They eventually make their way to the computer room that shows them footage of Ravus being attacked by the Emperor after finally accepting Noctis as his king. Ardyn, disguised as Noctis, comes into the room and finishes Ravus off. The boys continue their way through the fortress and find the room that holds the lock for the crystal. Before they're able to unlock and run though, they are met with a mysterious talking daemon, one obsessed with the crystal and the ring. They beat it for now, confused as to what happened, and make their way towards Noctis as Ignis heard his voice. Meanwhile, Noctis is making his way through a puzzle of sorts that Ardyn has set up. Noctis adds power to an elevator so that he can make his way to the crystal and Prompto, but is stopped by an iron giant. Falling down to where Ravus is, he reads notes that tell the last things he did before his death, agreeing that if Noctis can claim Leviathan's power, he would gladly give up his sword and call him king. Noctis is pissed like never before again and grabs his father's sword, then makes his way towards Ardyn. After some more puzzle-like places, he finally makes it to Ignis and Gladio. Together again, they head for Prompto, finally finding him. After a reunion, Prompto tells the boys that he's really from the Empire, and they're like, "Oh, okay. Who cares, dude? Who gives a fuck? You're Lucius and your family." Forbes the talking daemon shows up and they finish him off. They make their way back down to get to the crystal. On their way to the hangar leading to the crystal, they run into a corrupted Ravus who begs for them to kill him. They finish the job. There's no time to rest as they're surrounded by a bunch of daemons. The boys tell Noctis to go to the crystal after Ardyn gives him two options: stay there and die with them, or get the crystal and destroy all the daemons. He goes after the crystal, promising he'll come back. Little did Noctis know this wouldn't be the case. He finally gets to the crystal and asks it to use his power to stop the daemons. But wait, what's happening? He's getting absorbed. Ardyn shows up to tell Noctis a tale, one of a scourge and daemons that were consuming the world. But thanks to a prince that was able to take it all in, the world was saved. However, a jealous king not chosen by the crystal demonized the healer prince of the people. Turns out, Noctis' bloodline was in Zunia, and took the name of Lucius Calum from Ardyn years ago. Ardyn is bent on revenge. He won't be satisfied with getting it now, as Noctis is still too young. Once Noctis becomes the crystal champion, then Ardyn will fight him, as killing him then will allow both the bloodline and the crystal to leave the world. The boys arrive, but it's too late. Noctis is gone. They take their anger on Ardyn, but of course, they can't kill him. He walks away with a smile on his face while they are standing there distraught. In the crystal, Noctis meets Bahamut. He tells him he has to fulfill his calling of banishing Ardyn from this world. Ardyn, holding in all the scourge that ravaged the land and kept him alive for all these years, was not allowed to be chosen by the crystal. Due to the false king branding him as a demon, he harbored anger and wanted to destroy the world as revenge. Noctis learns that to do this is to gain the power of the province. And the only way to do that is to take the power of the past kings at the cost of his own life. He accepts this as it's the only way to save the world, bringing the light back to it. He heads into a 10-year sleep. Time skips forward, and 10 years later, and wow, hey. You don't look the same at all. You sure you're drawn by, oh, Yusuke Nora. That's alright. Don't know why they changed it completely. I feel like they should have changed the base Noctis too, but, okay. 10 years have passed, art styles have changed, and Umbra has come to pick Noctis up. He makes his way from Angel Guard to the Golden Quay. It's covered with daemons from head to toe, and the world is completely taken over by the darkness. Noctis makes his way up the road, running into Telcott. He tells him how everyone has been over the past 10 years. Lessalem has been turned into a safe haven as the only city that can produce light. Hammerhead has turned into a Slayer's base of operations. Ignis, Prompto, and Gladio are hunting, and they don't deal with each other all the time, only working as a team every once in a while. That changes, of course, when Noctis returns. They get together, catch up one last time at a campfire, and make their way to Insomnia to settle the score with Ardyn. Inside, they learn that Kor is there leading a group of surviving Kingsglaive. Yeah, they brought him back up again. Feels weird because I feel like it should be the Crown's Guard that Kor leads and not the Kingsglaive, which maybe they are the same, but then why wasn't he in the movie? I mean, whatever. Anyways, they meet up and help him fight off daemons outside of the base. They go inside, have a talk that rallies up the troops, and Noctis promises that he will free the world from the darkness. They make their way outside and are confronted by Ardyn. They argue, he places a barrier around the citadel and tells Noctis to bring his A game, and then he leaves. They head to the entrance and are greeted by Cerberus. In 1.0, this was actually a generic Bahamut enemy, so it's kind of cool that they changed it to Cerberus from the movie. They fight it out with the Mutt not being able to bring it down. Kor comes in to join the party. They watch the dog, but not without one casualty. Kor takes the last attack and Noctis thanks him for all he's done. Kor leaves, wounded. Before they can get in, they have to take down the barrier. It won't be easy though, as a horde of daemons show up. Thankfully, Noctis has the power of the gods and Luna. After taking down the barrier, she says one last goodbye and disappears. They make their way to the Citadel and are greeted by the god who hates humans himself, Ifrit. The scene from the start of the game plays out in full, as they go head to head with this deity. They fight him until it's time to summon Shiva. She takes him out, finally giving the man peace. The boys are finally able to enter the Citadel, but before they can get to Ardyn, they have to fight the rulers of yore, Fierce, the Rogue, and the Mystic. Each bros gets a pretty fucking Kino cheesy friendship speech, and after each defeat, they are given the blessing to go forward by the rulers. Before the final battle, Noctis picks a picture of the gang as a memento because this could be the last time they see each other. As they enter the room, they see Ardyn sitting on the throne and characters chained from the ceiling. And I don't want to do this again, but I really gotta. Other than Regis and Luna, why are the Emperor and Nyx here? Now you could argue Nyx here because the player saw him in the movie, but Noctis doesn't know who he is. And while it is a role-playing game, you're playing the role of Noctis. And I feel like if Noctis doesn't know who the character is, this is pointless and useless, even if the player does know. But not everyone played Kingsglaive or watched Kingsglaive. So it's I don't get it. And I think the Emperor is a worse offender because you don't even know the character at all. You just know he's obsessed with the crystal and the ring, and he turns into a demon, and that's it. How are you supposed to feel anything for this guy? Noctis doesn't even know the guy, unless there's something in lore where Noctis knew the guy growing up. But like, it doesn't make any sense. It's dumb. I don't get why they did it. I think they could have put someone else. They could have put other characters there, like his mother. His mother's not even there, and she was in the anime. Anyways, Ardyn knocks out the bros and tells Noctis only they can fight as this is the battle of the kings. They warp down to the city and have their final showdown, having a back and forth of sword slashes, insults, and taunts, making their way to the skies of the city because they can fly with the power of kings, finally ending it in front of the citadel with the kings watching over them. Noctis ends Ardyn's life, finally killing him. He tells the gang thank you for everything and makes his way to the throne room. It's time to fulfill his promise and free the world of darkness. Taking in all the swords of the past kings, including his father's, he passes. In the afterlife, Ardyn is still hell-bent on his revenge. They have one final bout. Noctis summons the kings, and they attack. Ardyn, along with Noctis, disappears from existence. In a post-credit scene, we see Noctis and Luna finally able to wed and sleep together for all eternity. In one last post-credit scene, the final campfire that the boys went to is shown. In one of the few scenes I feel that deserved its payoff, Noctis and the boys talk to each other and let out all their feelings. He finally thanks them for everything, knowing how hard it is for him to leave them once this is all over. They cry, ending the game on a bittersweet note. So how do I feel about the game's story overall? Well, it's alright. I think the new scenes did add much needed content for Luna, Kor, Aranea, and Ravis, because in the base game it felt like they had nothing to them, and it was clear they were an afterthought to the writing team compared to having a solid brotherly relationship. The story still has two major problems: payoff without build-up and tell, don't show. Luna's death and Noctis weeping for her feels more earned in the update, but at the same time, we only get a few scenes of their childhood and are told how close they are. We don't see much of it, and I know that's because they were separated for years, but if you want me to think they have this deep relationship, I think they should have made it so they spend a lot of time together throughout the year, not just sending messages through a book. Another thing I think they could have helped was more CG scenes like they were planned to. It's obvious they were cut because the core conversation was a CG scene during the time the original team was still on it. On the topic of core, him being part of the party would have been great, as they would have had a father figure on the team and would have made an interesting dynamic during conversation. The bros are fine, but I think it would have made stuff much better. And you can get that from the few scenes that he is in with them. Jared, Verstale, and the Emperor, Insomnia, and Regis are the same. The first three being the absolute worst. Regis gets something in Kingsglaive about his character, that he's a strong king that cares about his son, but you don't see that relationship. Of course, Noctis will show his love for him and angry that he's dead in game. I get nothing from being told. I'm just not that kind of person. It can work sometimes for me, but here it just doesn't. I feel like there's not enough. I don't care about Regis, and I can't care about Noctis' love for him too much either. I really do think all of these characters should have got more screen time. They would have been so much better. Especially for Jared and the Emperor. If they really want me to care about Jared's death, like I say in the summary, they need to have the man on screen enough, and they just don't. Same with the Emperor. You're gonna put him at the end with Regis, Luna, and Nyx, and I said I did about Nyx already, but the Emperor's up there in the castle too. You don't know the guy. Noctis makes one comment saying, "Oh god, is that really the Emperor?" But why should he say that? Why should the player care if he says that? It makes no sense. We needed like a 1 or 2 hour prologue of Noctis' life in Insomnia. This is why I said Insomnia earlier. Sometimes locations can be a character within themselves. Look at Midgard. Show the city. Show me the world that the boys are so hurt from losing that they had to go to war with an entire empire alone. Show me Noctis' relationship with Luna, Ravis, Prompto, Gladio, Ignis, and Regis together. Like, you know, more family stuff as children. Give me stuff, more info into the empire, like with Final Fantasy VI, or the villain groups in other games like 12, 13, 7, and 8. Almost every Final Fantasy does this, man. Hajime Tabata's design philosophy for storytelling in this game specifically is another reason why the game ended up as it did. Even with the 2017 update, couldn't fix what the problems were. He wanted to make it so that it wasn't comprehensive and structured like an older Final Fantasy, like before this game. So he didn't want cutscenes to happen that didn't involve Nox and the bros. That's why we have so little scenes of Luna, the Empire, Ravis, all that stuff. While we do get good stuff with Ardyn, who's like really fantastic in the game anyway, it's clear that this was the reason why the game feels as weirdly structured as it is, and why it feels like there's no meat to a lot of the villains or the rest of the world. It's because he wanted to structure it that way. And his philosophy of the anime and movie being a separate thing that anyone can enjoy versus the game being something that you can do as Noctis, and those two things having more of the entire world's world building, it just comes off as weird, and that's why the story is so structured wrongly. And it's probably why we have stuff like Jared not being on screen enough for you to care about him. Don't get me wrong, what the game does well, they do really fucking well. Ardyn is a compelling villain. Despite not having his entire past, he's very threatening, very charismatic, and comes off as he's been doing this for a long time, building up to the climax of the game. His dialogue's fantastic, and I can't really think he's bad just because we don't have his entire past. I mean, we do now because of episode Ardyn, but I don't really think that meshes well with the main game. So what he is in the main game is very, very good. The Chocobros are some of the best characters in the franchise, and the relationship is really fucking strong. Helped by the game having banter happen while you explore. While I don't think that's the way you should do it for some important scenes, the casual stuff shows how much they care about each other. Noctis is really endearing, and I love his dialogue, despite what I said earlier, is really damn good and comes off as natural when he talks to every character. Prompto, while the jokester character, is very well developed into what he becomes in the endgame. Episode Prompto really helped us understand why he felt the way he did when he told the boys that he was from the Empire, because before you're just like, oh yeah, that makes sense why he'd feel so down about it and be like, oh, I knew you guys would come. But now that we actually see the reason why he feels so down and who his father is and all that stuff, I think that really helped him become a good as character as possible. Not that he was bad in the first place, but I really think it helped elevate him. Gladio is a static character, but he does his role really well. He's the one that keeps Noctis on track and holds the group together. Ignis to me is just flat out the best character, especially after his resolve scene in the swamp and everything in his episode. In the episode, we really see how much he loves Noctis. From his childhood up until he loses his vision, we see that he really is this dude's best friend, and the way they characterize it is fantastic through the dialogue, the cutscenes in episode Ignis, and the boss fights you have there. It's just so good, and you really get it through the determination scene too. Just overall, Ignis is just a fantastic character, and his love for Noctis is very clearly shown through more than just hearsay. The best Final Fantasy games are character-driven stories with some great pacing, good plot storytelling, and fun combat. And I can't really call this game great narratively because I think it doesn't do the character-driven story as well as it could. It moves way too fast, giving a lot of stuff no room to grow, relegating some important scenes to side quests or dialogue in the car. Now, while I said it's good, I don't think it makes up for everything that could be done, like I said, with Jared, Regis, and some other characters. The first half feels like nothing is really happening minus a few key moments, as I said earlier. The only good to great characters are a small handful. Too many characters feel sidelined and not given enough to be compelling. They need to give stuff more time, and while I understand Hajime Tabata probably had to make that stuff multimedia to get the game out, I think it should have been part of the game, and it's super upsetting that they didn't do that. Now, I can't say the game is bad anymore because of my want for Versus 13, because I'm looking at this from the perspective of Hajime Tabata's vision in 2020 after all the updates are out. I will agree that in 2016 I was really hard on it after not being what I dreamed of, but after all the updates, I'm looking at it from a perspective of what did this guy make, not what did I lose because this guy made it. And it's just not as good as it could be, plot wise and character driven wise, and character writing wise too. It feels thrown together, and while it is saved by its good writing, in places I think it doesn't save it well enough. And leading up to 2016, as I stated in my rant, Hajime Tabata was changing the story along with his writers up until the game went on to the disc, and it feels like his vision wasn't clear, like he didn't have a solid vision minus the parts that went out early on anime and DVD as in movies and stuff. And it's so weird because Type 0 isn't like that, and neither is Crisis Core. So I don't know what happened. Maybe it's just the stress of working under a giant corporation trying to fix something that you were just handed to because they wanted the game out fast as fuck. I know a lot of people love the story, and if it did something for you, that's fantastic. I'm happy for you. But for me, it isn't good, and I hate to say that for my favorite franchise of all time. It really, really sucks. Well, you think the story's alright, but how do you feel about the rest of the game? Well, let's start with the gameplay. Now, when I say gameplay, I don't mean just combat, I mean a bunch of mechanics. The side quests, experience game, all the stuff you interact with while you play the game. I know that might seem kind of obvious, but I feel like some people separate them for some reason when that's not really needed. I feel like the combat has this weird problem where it wants to be an action RPG, but doesn't want to fully commit. It wants to just be like something strange, like realistic type of thing. Let me explain. The combat is called the ACB, Active Cross Battle System, which to me feels like an evolution of Type 0's, but I could be wrong. When you're in combat with enemies, some want to give you proper tells with their attacks like a regular action RPG, while a lot of them, especially the monsters, do not. Let's look at 7 Remake. All enemies have a strategy to them. They'll have specific attack animations you need to watch out for, and weaknesses telling you which attacks or magic will be properly needed for the situation. Do you use Punisher mode? Do you use Barret to shoot? Or do you use Tifa or Aerith to build a stagger number? Plenty of other options in the game too, but 15 doesn't do this. Of course, you don't really need to do all that, but they could have also gone the KH route where it's reaction based, where like 7 Remake, you'll need to watch enemy patterns and learn what magic or attacks will do more damage to them. As you watch the movements, you know whether to block and or dodge. 15 monsters have very random animations, no set patterns most of the time, and the only way to tell when to block is when they throw the square button up on your screen. You do have the option to turn that off, and you can just watch the enemy flash to know when to block, but it's at the cost of the HUD disappearing. I like to see HP bars and other parts of the HUD, so I wish that I didn't have to choose. I wish that you could just pick and choose what parts of the HUD you want to remove. Other than that, it's also mostly just phasing through attacks, because like I said, they have random attack animations. Some monsters have the same animation for 2 different attacks. It can get very frustrating because I feel like I shouldn't be getting hit by some stuff, but because of how enemies are made, I do. It can get worse when you're in a mob situation involving the Empire bases because you have to dodge bullets while holding down square to make sure gunners' bullets don't hit you. And there's no real feedback until you're down. It makes dealing with them while also dealing with mechs very annoying, as mechs hit hard and use things like missiles which sometimes have tells and sometimes don't. That's really just what the combat is, very frustrating, very automated. It feels like it wants to be Monster Hunter but missing how Monster Hunter does monster movesets and patterns. Now I will give the game this, they did do the Monster Hunter thing. While I don't think they did it correctly with attack animations, I feel like they did get it down with finding weak points on monsters and breaking parts of them, and along with the fact where you just basically hold square to dodge and block. Another problem with the game is attack feedback. I already explained about the enemies, but Noctis, for some reason, this doesn't apply to every character or DLC, maybe because each had a different director. Gladio feels weighty when you swing his big sword. It's probably because of, at least from my experience, you can't hold the attack button. Ignis has his elemental daggers, which are also good. Each one has a different type of attack range: fire, close combat, ice, AoE, and thunder you fucking zoom across the screen. But because you have to hit the button, you feel like you input something, and it wasn't just the game doing it. Again, no automation. Prompto has a gun, so holding the attack button makes sense, and it makes his combat feel like a decent third-person shooter. Guns have good sound, and each gun has enough to feel different. Noctis, on the other hand, has this problem where none of his attacks feel like they have any weight to them, and the sound effects weren't satisfying. That was in 1.0. In 1.16, I think they fixed this for the most part. As you know, in most action RPGs, you have to hit the attack button to do an attack. In 15, you can do that, but the main thing they want you to do is to hold it, as I explained earlier with Gladio, Ignis, them feeling more like you're doing something than Noctis. Because you don't get proper feedback like you would normally from pressing the button, it feels weird. And I know why there's so much automation in the game. It's because in an interview, Hajime Tabata said that he wanted the game to give you instant gratification. So you just get everything by just pressing one button. It doesn't feel as good as a regular action RPG does when you attack. Think of Noctis as something similar to a turn-based character in real time. That's how it comes off to me. In action turn-based or a turn-based RPG, you choose the attack and the animation plays out for you. It's similar here because you aren't really actively hitting circle. You are pushing it in and holding it to see the whole moveset play out. I don't like that at all, and they do, like I said earlier, have the option for you to press the button multiple times. But even then, it still feels similar to me holding it, and I always find myself holding it a lot of the time. But after the update, the feeling of weight is there. Each weapon has different enough moveset and attack animation so that they don't come off as samey, but I don't think that's fixed for every type of weapon. Spears, regular swords, and guns don't really give me the feedback I want in terms of attack animation, so that's kind of upsetting. It's sad that they couldn't do more for it and make it feel more like a traditional action RPG, but I'm glad they fixed some of it. But it not being as well designed with its feedback and button presses as possible, it makes it so Noctis isn't that fun to play, and I wish he was more fun overall. But at least now with character switching, if I get bored of him, I can play as someone else. Boss fights for the most part aren't very good. We get some good ones like Aranea and the Mystic, and even then Aranea gets bogged down by the fact that they had to, for some reason, include mini soldiers to come in and shoot us while we're trying to fight her. And some of the hunt bosses, while they are giant animals, do give off proper animation tells so you can know what you're going to do and how the fight works. But Ardyn, the final boss, feels very thrown together with how he reacts, and sometimes he just doesn't move at all. It's like in Osaka Cage game, the portable ones. Leviathan and Titan, while the scale is gigantic and the spectacle is crazy, they don't feel good to play. Levy and the final boss have the same problem with the flying around mechanic. It's not very satisfying to do and just feels very, very empty. It's upsetting because Leviathan especially, something I've been anticipating since 2013, and I just wanted a huge spectacle boss that was fun to fight. Sadly, we couldn't get that, and the only really well-designed bosses are Aranea and the Mystic. Another thing that feels off in this game is character building, magic, weaknesses, and status ailments. It's very strange because other than weapon type and 3 different versions of magic, thunder, light, thunder, water, and fire, there's no proper character building or strategy setup to this game. The Ascension grid is there, but it's much like a lesser spear grid. They have stuff on it, but it's mostly things like give the AI the ability to heal, use shield to protect, to get a new link skill, make phase take no MP for Noctis, which is fine. It helps you feel like you're progressing in the game, but because you don't get any magic spells other than fire, thunder, ice, and eventually holy, it feels lesser. I don't like status being turned into a crafting thing. Just let me inflict ailments normally. Feel like my brain juices get flowing when I figure out what the enemy is vulnerable to. I know the reason is because the crystal is gone from the kingdom that Noctis can only use magic through obtaining it in the overworld by sucking it out of the rocks, but Ignis can just use it whenever he wants, so it's a weird design choice. I don't understand it. You can get status ailments by combining them with items you craft, but most of them don't really do anything and they feel like an afterthought. You can only get 4. You're limited to poison, stop, slow, and curse. Now the way you do use thunder, fire, and ice is kind of strategic depending on the weather, but the weather is randomized, so there's not really much depth to it. Bosses and enemies in other games can be hit by stop, slow, poison, sleep, mini, toad, etc., but most of those are saved for you, the player. It's pretty upsetting. It means that other than having 3 accessories, buffs from cooking, which feels limiting to me, and weapon switching, there's no real character building. It makes the game feel like it's barely an RPG, along with the fact that you can just use items whenever and you have basically 2 HP bars. They wanted to make the game way too accessible to me. You can have depth to your system and it still be able to have people be smoothed into the franchise. The franchise has done it multiple times. Side content in the game is split into 3 categories: minigames, side quests, and hunts. 3 mainstays of the franchise that have been there since forever, basically. Hunts showing up in the early 2000s. 15 does these really well almost all the time. Minigames are fun distractions. Even if I don't really care for fishing, it's a fun pastime and a nice pace breaker. Same with the chocobo races. Hunts are your average monster hunts. Kill monsters on the contract and you increase your rank to fight more monsters and get money. It's where a good amount of the extra bosses are, and I liked it in every game prior. Yeah, it's still fighting what you do in all games, but it gives you fun challenges and allows you to see iconic Final Fantasy enemies you don't usually see in the main game. Side quests are the hit and miss portion of the side content. Some are really good, while others are clearly things that the quest givers can do on their own. When a quest feels like a chore and not having fun, it falls flat. Like the catching the frog one, was that really a necessary side quest? She can't just go pick up 5 frogs on her own like she's done before? Or the dog tags. Dave is a hunter, like, can't you just go do that yourself? The boys cannot be the only competent people in this world. The best ones to me ended up being stuff like the Imperial base invasions, as of course only the bros can do this, being the strongest in the kingdom right now. You can deal with those in 2 ways: stealth, which I always fail at, and taking them head on. Kinda raw. Or you can do stuff like the cup noodle one, where you have 3 options to spice up your food, giving you 3 options for the quest. I like this because for one, it's connected to the bros themselves. There's a dungeon to grab one of the items, and as it turns out, that dungeon also leads to a royal arm. It's one of my favorite parts of the game, as it's funny and really fun. Side quests similar to that ones are the ones where it's clear the person giving the quest cannot do themselves, or having nice small storylines are the best. And 15 has those, but I think they're a bit far and few. Speaking of dungeons, dungeon design in this game can be hit or miss. Sometimes it's really good, like Insomnia, or the mountains that lead to the zoo and his eggs, but other times we get dungeons like the Pitos dungeon, which I had footage of, but I'm not gonna post it. It's good in concept, it's not executed well. And then sometimes there's just like the really boring, lame one line go through the area dungeons that don't really have much to them. The world of 15 is really pretty, but I don't think it's varied enough. Well, maybe it is now because of the DLC, where we get a snow area and a destroyed Altissa, and it kind of makes up for the mostly grassy places and dungeons that have a lot of cave-like areas. I really do think this being an urban Final Fantasy, it needed more cities. We have the gas stations in Destroyed Insomnia, but it doesn't really make up for it because Destroyed Insomnia is destroyed. It's not really a living, breathing city. I wish we got to explore the full one instead. Lestalem could have made up for it, but it's really small and there's not really much to do in it. It is pretty though, and Altissa, while more explorable and having hunts, it feels more restricted than Lestalem does. You do get the airship replacement that's a flying regalia, and it kind of helps you change up the view by allowing you to go into the sky, but I don't think that's enough. The game has good towns, but again, there are only 2, so to make up for the first half feeling kind of samey, I think they could have gone with another city, especially with places in the second half. If we could have explored more places in the second half, I think that would have been better. Like Tenebrae, but Tenebrae is just one little area and there's not much to do in it. I know the point was they were strapped for time and they had to rush to get to the capital, but I still think they could have done better with it. While I did complain about similar looking locations, the visuals overall in this game are really fucking good. Luminous Engine is masterful. This game is so good looking, even if the textures in this video look dookie, I promise on PC it looks stunning. The elemental effects, especially fire, amazing. Like, look at the way Cerberus looks in the boss fight, dude. Bless this lighting. Character models are really nice too. Sometimes they can get kind of weird looking when they aren't the cutscene ones, like this. NPC models aren't really that nice looking either and kind of clash with the characters designed by Roberto and Nomura, but for the most part, they still hold up. And last but not least, we'll finally get to the sound design and the music. This game, like any other Final Fantasy, has a masterful soundtrack, but I think this OST is the best among all of them. Yoko Shimomura of Kingdom Hearts fame posed this along with a few others, and her music in this game is easily the best from the franchise. She is my favorite composer, and one of the reasons I became so attached to the product in the first place from its inception. Every single track in this game is fantastic and music to my ears. Of course, it's music. I was worried she wouldn't be on after it became 15, but she stayed, and even when I feel like some music is misplaced, like Omnis Lacrima, feels like a story track and not an extra boss one, I do really like the music. She feels more in her element here than she does with Kingdom Hearts because it's not trying to be Disney-esque. Not that her Kingdom Hearts music is bad, far from it, but I just think that she has more freedom here. The episodes each have their own composers too. Keiichi Okabe of Nier fame composed the episode Gladio. Yoshitaka Suzuki worked on the main game with Yoko and was the main composer on episode Prompto. Yasunori Mitsuda, who worked on the masterful soundtracks such as fucking Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, and Xenoblade, did episode Ignis. They all brought their A game as the OSTs for each of them is as impressive as the base game. Now, for the sound effects and voice acting, I think they're both pretty damn good. Sound effects such as the menus, the attacks, the car moving, monster sounds, things like that, all do a good job of making you immerse into the world of Final Fantasy 15. If a game can have good audio quality such as that, I see it as being at least a good video game if it goes well with everything else. Voice acting is hit or miss, mostly for the English dub, such as Ravis and Gladio, who sound like they weren't directed properly as the others, and sometimes feel off. Other than them though, everyone else really hits home, especially the Japanese dub side of it. Everyone does a great job there. I love how everyone sounds and feels like they've been giving it their all, especially Keiji Fujiwara as Ardyn. May he rest in peace. So that's basically everything. Despite my issues I've listed, I've also listed things I really do like about the game. After this playthrough with the Royal Edition update, I can say this is a pretty damn good game. It does fall in areas. Most of my problems that I had in 2016 were gone, but a lot of them are still there. And I think that just is because Hajime Tabata, despite his best, couldn't make the dream of having the best Final Fantasy game ever, because a lot of it feels like him and his staff didn't have a real proper vision. But after the update, I can really say that they tried their best to put it back on track, and I can say, yeah, I think you were a good video game. I definitely recommend Final Fantasy 15 if this is your first Final Fantasy, and I felt like I was way too harsh on it back in 2016. Definitely not as bad as I made it out to be.
Hey, I'm sorry. For what?
We're not subscribing to QuasarD Games.
I know, right?
I can't believe you, Noctis. Why wouldn't you subscribe to QuasarD Games? He's the bestest YouTuber ever. But it's okay. I forgive you. As long as you subscribe today and support his videos from now on, we'll be friends forever. Okay, Prompto. I'll subscribe to QuasarD Games. Thank you, QuasarD Games. Because of you, our friendship is eternal.